So these pictures you see on this slide, if you look at the picture on the left, this is a woman living in a Hooverville with two of her children. It is one of the most iconic, one of the most famous pictures of this time period. She is, I think the story is she's only in her early 30s. She looks much, much older than that in this photo. Um, we'll talk about the other photo in a second. One of the problems with poverty is it equals illness. It equals illness because people who live in poverty do not get the preventative health care. They don't have annual checkups to the doctor. They do not have access to the doctor's office or hospitals usually. And before Social Security was created, or Medicare or Medicaid, you did not even get the medicine you needed if you were sick. You just were sick, and sometimes the common cold could become something much worse and kill you. Another problem for people living in poverty is you are often out of work because of economic conditions around you. And those few jobs during this era, the Great Depression, created a huge amount of competition, people competing for those jobs. That meant that if people had some sort of prejudice because of color or even prejudice against the old, you could discriminate against minorities, women, any minority like African American or Latino. You could easily discriminate against them because there were so many people looking for jobs this period. Churches would often step in to help minorities and people in need, but the problem became so big so quickly during the Great Depression and so vast that churches and private organizations couldn't help, and the government was going to have to come up with some sort of solutions to help people. If you lived at home, nothing was wasted. Everything was eaten. It sort of went back to the old era in the South of the slave days where the slaves who lived on the plantations, they wasted no food. All the scraps of the meat that were given to them were used for something. Every single piece of protein was used. Soup lines like the one in the bottom right-hand corner popped up all over for people. They still have soup lines in the in Indiana, in Indianapolis for that matter. If you go down to Wheeler Mission, they serve 3 meals a day for people who are homeless. This one picture I like especially because it says, for the unemployed only, sandwiches and beer. I don't know why they're serving beer to people for free, but there you go, sandwiches and beer. And this is another soup line. This one is coffee and donuts for the unemployed. And these are men who are out looking for jobs or hustling out on the street, making a little bit of money. Next slide. Penny auctions, this was one of the nicer parts of this era. Sometimes communities, when a farmer could not pay off his loans or they'd taken out to buy seed and stuff at the beginning of the year, the banks would come in and sell off his machinery and sell off his farm. A lot of times the communities would come to these auctions and they wouldn't let other people outside the community enter these auctions, and the community would bid for pennies on everything and then return everything back to the owners. So that's one way that people did pull together. Riding the rails, finding people to travel with, kind of reminds us of George and Lenny and of Mice and Men. One thing that did happen on the rails is 250,000 teenagers who either dropped out of school or graduated and didn't have jobs left home. They realized they were old enough to take care of themselves. They didn't want to be a burden on their family, so they would leave home and ride the rails, going from community to community looking for odd jobs. Whoops, going on to the next slide now. Parties that were undemocratic, like the Communist Party and the Socialist Party, grew because a lot of people figured if this is what democracy is, then maybe democracy doesn't work. There's a socialist rally in New York City. Renter groups formed to protest the increase of rents in big cities like Chicago, LA, and New York. People generally began to accept having to give handouts and get handouts. This is a guy who had been in the country, obviously had picked some apples, came into the city, sell them for 5 cents a piece. Jobless men keep going. We can't take care of our own here in this city. So things were rough. Things were rough in little towns. Things were rough in big cities. Next slide. There was change coming. One of the things that happened when FDR, who we'll talk about in a second, got elected was Prohibition was repealed. That opened up more jobs that were legal jobs. 8 states kept it. The Empire State Building was built during this time period, and here you can see guys. You know what? Let's go to the Empire State Building on the last lecture.